Hi, this is Carlisle, and this is Carlisle's Chesapeake, and today we have Laura Era with us as our guest. Laura, you're going to tell us about Anna Ella Carroll. So exciting for you to be here. Thank you for being with us.
I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to have been chosen to paint Anna Ella Carroll in a very specific, important painting that hopefully will hang somewhere in a museum or someplace, and everybody can learn about her as I learned about her.
Well, tell us about Anna Ella Carroll.
Yeah, I was approached about 7 years ago from a group from Dorchester County that wanted to bring to light the story of Anna. She is from the Eastern Shore.
Dorchester County.
And I'm from Dorchester County also.
There you go.
Cool relation there. And she was born in Wicomico County but lived in Dorchester for many years. And few people know that she was chosen to be on Lincoln's cabinet during the Civil War. A very bloody time in our history. And she was a very knowledgeable woman in military affairs and constitutional affairs. She ran her father's law office when he was the governor of Maryland.
Yeah, the governor of Maryland.
Yeah, Thomas King Carroll, his name was. And she was just brilliant. And she stepped way outside her gender lines back then. And so Lincoln, getting to know her through Thomas Holliday Hicks, who was the governor at the time, picked her to be on his cabinet, and of all things, to be a military advisor.
Well,
now, that was unheard of.
Well, let's step back a second. We're dealing in the 1850s. She's the oldest child of 9, I think it is. Is it 9 children in the family?
I think so.
9 children. Her father is descendant of, he's a cousin to Charles Carroll, who was the first, not the first, he was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
From Maryland.
That's right.
But she was a Protestant. And I point this out, not so much to say religion was important then, but where your upbringing came from. So that she had studied so much, not just about military, about her ancestors. Tell us about her upbringing, if you could, please.
Well, her father, like I said, was a governor for several years, and she ran his law office because he had homeschooled her. And I guess she must have shown natural talent in military and constitutional and power. She wrote a pamphlet, Powers of the President, War Powers of the President. Yep. And I know that they also had, I think the railroads were, his family had something to do with the railroads. I don't know a lot about her early life, but I do know that, when the president saw her natural talents in this, he asked her to be on his cabinet and to be, of all things, a military advisor. And at the time, women didn't do that. And she was also a spy for the Union. She went behind the Confederate lines. As a woman, it was easier to do that. And she went down the Mississippi and the Tennessee River to find out maybe how the war could be ended earlier. And she did come up with a plan for that, and it saved many, many lives. But my part in this, I didn't know anything about her, and I bet few people, I bet most of the audience doesn't even know anything about Anna until you really look her up. And you can go online, Anna Ella Carroll. Look her up. She was brilliant in the 1800s, probably the most notable woman of that time. And the people from Dorchester County wanted me to paint a painting, actually to repaint history, because there had already been a painting of that very important event of Lincoln reading the first Emancipation Proclamation, or the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. And an artist back then named Francis Carpenter wanted to immortalize this grand event on canvas, and he did. And he went into the White House for 6 months and worked on this painting. But the painting has an empty chair in it. And it's very
the painting that he painted when Lincoln was still alive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that he was doing this Emancipation Proclamation. He left this chair empty, and it's a very prominent spot right in the front of the painting. And everyone believes that that was meant to be for Anna Ella Carroll. But she couldn't be included at the time, maybe because she was a woman. We couldn't even vote back then or own land. Maybe because she was a spy and you don't want her picture shown to everybody.
Right.
We don't know the real reasons. That hasn't been found in writing anywhere.
It probably won't.
It probably won't. But the chair has a military sash on it and a sword, and it has books and papers around it that were attributed to her. So you come up with your own conclusion. But the people in Dorchester wanted it to be repainted, and so I got to paint it again and put Anna in her rightful chair.
So these Friends of Anna Ella Carroll, an organization that you can find on Facebook, their page on Facebook, they asked you to paint a painting, and here it is.
And this is a painting, and you can see Anna over there in the chair that has, I took the military sash, which was red, and I made it into a shawl, to go around her shoulders, to make that connection between the two paintings. And I also have her looking at you and Lincoln looking at you. And
is that different than what it is in the original
yes,
painting?
and of course she isn't in the original,
Yeah.
but Lincoln isn't really looking at you. He's kind of looking off into space.
Huh.
In fact, nobody is looking at you in the original painting. But in the art world, anytime you have a subject in a painting looking at the viewer, it's strong. It means that person's important. It's a very poignant meaning to it. So I purposefully made her looking at the viewer. And I put a look on her face, kind of not smart alecky or anything like that. No. I didn't want it to be that way. But as I have said to other people,
I would say knowing, don't you think?
Yeah, very knowing, and not a smirk or anything, but just sort of like, it's been a long time. Like, it's about freaking time. and that's the kind of look I wanted, because sadly, when Lincoln died, he was going to recognize her. He told Anna, I will recognize you after the boys are not in the field fighting anymore. It wouldn't be good for morale for men back then to think that a woman might be planning military strategies.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So he says, I can't give you recognition now, but when the war is over, I will. Well, we all know what happened. He was, of course, assassinated. And all of Anna's work, her pamphlets, her papers, many of them
she
were
was a
destroyed.
brilliant writer.
She was a brilliant writer.
The men actually, from what I've read in Lincoln's Loyal Lady, a book that I think should be for college-bound students everywhere, because it is just chock full of information about the Emancipation Proclamation, about the writ of habeas corpus, about how important Maryland was as a state, as a swing state, that we might not have gone with the Union. We could have just as easily gone with the South, with the Confederates, and how important that was, and the fact that she intuited both sides here. She didn't want to say the Union is right, and even though she did give up her slaves, she didn't want to say the Union is right and the Confederates are wrong, because she knew we needed to work together again when that time came. And how important it was for her to not only put in writing arguments for our president, for the
Right.
the Secretary of War, to give the president powers as a president, and I mean powers that maybe another president hadn't taken before.
Exactly. And she was so involved in that. And yet, how many people know about her? They know about many of the other men, William Seward and Stanton and Wells and Montgomery Blair and some of the other cabinet members, but they don't know about Anna. And so the suffragettes, they kind of took her up under, her story and went with it. But really, she spent the rest of her life trying to get her due recognition.
And money.
Money
Money was the most
and money that
important
was
thing.
owed her for being on the cabinet.
Right.
And they'd been through war, and many other things would always come up, and she would just kind of get pushed down again. And so that was very sad. I think towards the end of her life, she did get a little bit.
Well,
but then she died, in the 90s, 1890s.
But the fact that to this day, people go and celebrate the anniversary of her death, and at her gravesite, the beautiful gravesite. You want to tell us about that too?
Yeah, that's in a very historic church down in Church Creek in Dorchester County. It's below Cambridge off Route 16. And it's the oldest Episcopal church still in use in America today. And her family, her father, her mother, brothers, they're all buried in that churchyard. And you can see her grave there. In fact, her grave is closest to the water. They have a pier there that people would, in the old days, you go up the river to church. You'd go in your boat and you tie up, and then you go into the service. Well, there's her grave as the first one you see when you come up. So it's something that people might want to go read. It's a beautiful inscription on the back of her stone, too. I can't remember all the words, but it does attribute her to Lincoln and how much she did for our country, our union. And I think people should really research her. And that's the idea of the painting, to bring attention to her. And I'm hoping someday that maybe I will donate it to a museum or possibly the State House in Maryland. That would be very appropriate, I think. Or maybe history will repeat itself in that the original painting sat in the artist's studio for 13 years, and then a woman from New York bought it, and she donated it to the federal government, and that's why the original painting hangs in the Capitol building in the Senate wing. But maybe that could happen. That would be a great thing if someone were to buy this painting from me and then they donate it. They'd get a big tax write-off. What could be sweeter than that? And then many people will see this and they'll say, "Who is that woman?" And they will question and look up and go on the internet. And I'm not a sign-toting feminist type woman. That's not my style. But I do believe when somebody is due something and she is so overdue to be recognized, that's so important. And so that's why I really feel a kinship towards her. And I really was honored to paint this painting and repaint history, so to speak.
Well, I want to kind of do some parallel playing here. Mm-hmm. You've got Anna Ella Carroll at the same time, not the same time, but then you have Francis Scott Key, mm-hmm. Who preceded her. I mean, they lived at the same time period, but preceded her during the War of 1812, which was also very key here on the Chesapeake. And she doesn't have words yet that people can, or she has words that can be memorized but haven't been memorized yet, whereas Francis Scott Key's words were memorized.
That's right.
But she wrote so many words that were so important in creating arguments to allow President Lincoln to do what he had to do to get the job done.
Exactly.
because it was uncharted waters for our country, to be in a situation where brothers were fighting against brothers.
That's true.
And you didn't want to put them in the doghouse, them being the Confederates in the doghouse, for doing what they did, because they believed that they were right, and the Northerners believed that they were right.
I know, that's...
And so it is a testament to a woman being able to go behind enemy lines, to straddle both sides of the fence. And women went to her and said, please explain to us what our men are thinking. Because the men didn't talk to them.
That could be. That could be. Well, an interesting thing about the position of the people in the painting is that when he was reading this, the artist, now whether Lincoln did this, told the artist to do this, or whether he just did it, everyone to Lincoln's right, that's Salmon Chase and that's Stanton there, agreed with the Emancipation Proclamation and what he was doing. Everyone on this side questioned or disagreed.
Wow.
So look at the amount of people. Now look where Anna is.
Wow.
Now, the reason she's here, I mean, she bought freedom for the slaves at her family. You know,
Right.
she bought their freedom.
Right.
She did not like slavery. That wasn't the question here. She wasn't wholeheartedly with Lincoln in how it was going to happen. She believed that these people should be indoctrinated slowly into free society, not just, you're free.
Well, not only
So-
that, but from what I read in Kay Larson's book, there was actually an organization that wanted to start a colony in Belize,
Yes.
so that freed men, and I guess slaves, because at that point I really don't know, but so that people could go and have their freedom.
Right.
So maybe if this didn't work out, because they didn't have a crystal ball, they didn't know how the Civil War was going to end,
No.
that was another way, and maybe that was what her first belief was. We don't know that.
Yes, that's what I've also read, that she believed in colonizing them back, and who knows, that might have been more gentle on what happened. I mean,
Right.
it was like all of a sudden you're enslaved and all of a sudden now you're free. But she thought steps. So that's the reason why she's on that
Interesting.
side.
Very
So
interesting.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Now the president in the portrait over the mantle,
Right.
that's Andrew Jackson. And the reason he is in the painting, everything has meaning. See, everything has meaning. It's not just there for fun. So the reason he's in it was he was also known as a preserver of the Union. And that's the connection between him and Lincoln, preserver of the Union.
Yeah.
So
Above all else.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's
I think
right.
that was her motto too.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Laura, it's been a pleasure having you.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
we look forward to seeing you again and learning more about Anna Ella Carroll.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look her up.
And we'll be back with the second half about the Monarch Butterfly. Hi, we're back, and we welcome Jen Myhills. Jen is with the National Wildlife Federation in Annapolis, their regional office in Annapolis. How are you, Jen?
I'm great, Carlisle. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Tell us about your organization first, and then we're going to talk about the Monarch Butterfly, which is really an important butterfly in the United States.
Absolutely. Well, National Wildlife Federation is one of the country's largest conservation organizations. We have more than 6 million members across the country. 35,000 of them are here in Maryland. And we're really dedicated to uniting Americans to ensure that wildlife thrive in our rapidly changing world. And that can be wildlife from small butterflies like the monarch to large iconic wildlife like the bison of the American West. So we work across the country, but here in the Mid-Atlantic, as you said, we're based in Annapolis, Maryland, and focus on the 9-state region in the Chesapeake and Delaware River watersheds.
So tell us about the monarch butterfly. It's such a beautiful butterfly.
Sure. So I think a lot of people might be familiar with the orange and black monarch butterfly that we often see in our backyards. But unfortunately, we're seeing fewer and fewer monarchs. Over the last 20 years, their population numbers have decreased by almost 90%. So a really alarming trend for monarchs as well as other pollinators. Butterflies, bees, even moths, and some birds are pollinators, which are really important for ensuring that we have diverse ecosystems of native plants, but also really important for the food that we eat. There's an estimate that 1 in every 3 bites of food that we eat is made possible because of pollinators.
Wow, that's huge.
It's huge, and so very concerning when we see trends like a 90% population decline. And so the National Wildlife Federation, as well as many partners across the country, have joined together to try to help restore native populations of monarchs as well as other pollinators.
So tell us what would be attributed to the decline of the
For monarchs, folks might not know this, as you see butterflies in their adult stage visiting beautiful flowers, getting nectar, but the caterpillar stage, the larval stage for butterflies is incredibly important. Many butterflies, like the monarch, have a very specific host plant for their caterpillars. So for the monarch, that's milkweed. So you might think of that as maybe not the kind of plant that you would have in your backyard garden, but it's incredibly important for monarchs. Without milkweed, monarch caterpillars cannot survive. That's their only food source. And so the biggest reason for monarch population decline is the loss of milkweed and milkweed habitat across the country.
So I'm assuming then that we consider milkweed to be a weed.
I think that had been thought of that way in many cases. It was along hedgerows and in fields and in meadows and not in a more manicured garden setting. But when you look at native milkweed, it does have beautiful flowers. You have beautiful pink flowers, or if you look at another species like butterfly weed, which is also in the native milkweed family, beautiful orange flowers. So I think it takes a moment to just rethink how we think about our gardens and really focusing on bringing in native plants, those that are adapted to our local soil and climatic conditions and that have evolved with wildlife like the monarch over decades, over centuries, and that are really essential for their survival.
So if you were to want to have a monarch come to your garden, you would have some milkweed in it.
Absolutely.
And the milkweed smells wonderful. It has a really incredible fragrance. But it's not a flower that we would say, oh my gosh, I want that in my bouquet. But if you intersperse it.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of important plants for butterflies. So you need certainly milkweed to support caterpillars, but its flowers are also an important nectar source for adult monarch butterflies. But you might also have other, beautiful native wildflowers in your garden, like cardinal flower, goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, a lot of really beautiful things, New England asters, and it's really important to make sure that you have blooms that last over the entire growing season so that monarchs that are migrating from Mexico and the southern United States north have sources of food, and then those species that are coming back south for their overwinter migration also have a stopover location.
So this is huge. The monarch butterfly, this little thing, it's light as a feather, flies from Canada or New York all the way down to Mexico.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just totally amazing.
It is really amazing to think about. We think of some bird species as doing these really long migrations, but butterflies, the monarch in particular, is very unique in its migratory pathway. And that's also another reason why it's so important to, whether it's in our backyards or at schools or our places of worship, to have pollinator gardens that have milkweed for monarchs, because they need these stopover locations. We have monarchs that overwinter in Mexico and then begin the migration north. As they reach the southern United States, they will breed, lay their eggs, and then a new generation will, go the next distance further north. The monarchs live about 5 weeks. and then breed, and the next generation continues. And it's that last generation at the end of the summer that makes the entire journey south back to Mexico. That generation of monarchs lives about 8 months. And so it makes the whole journey back, overwinters in Mexico, and then starts the journey again the next year. And when it reaches the southern United States, begins the process again.
So I was up in Fair Hill, which is in the northern part of northern part of Maryland, state of Maryland, and witnessed a meadow that hadn't been mowed with a bunch of milkweed. And the milkweed is standing pretty tall. You see beautiful butterflies all around. Underneath, you've got to really look for the caterpillars. And they're bright. They're really bright, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really great example of being able to bring wildlife into your own backyard and really see an entire life cycle. It's, I think, fascinating for everyone, and children in particular, to see adult monarchs lay their eggs. You'll be able to witness the caterpillar emerge from the egg, grow over several weeks to a much larger size, form a chrysalis, and metamorphosize into an adult caterpillar again. A great chance to see wildlife up close and personal, and how you as an individual can really make an impact into improving habitat for wildlife in your own backyard.
And when I visited Fair Hill, I was taken around by a woman named Leslie Leader with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and we were looking for signs of where the caterpillars were because we couldn't find them. And then we saw the little eggs. Well, not the eggs. Actually, their excrement, the caterpillar's excrement. Mm-hmm. And she could tell like how recently the caterpillar had, done his duty on the leaf by how dry it was. So like that was like a way for us to maybe find, where is that caterpillar? Is he on this leaf, or has he gone to yet another plant?
Yeah, it's really, as I said, I think a fascinating opportunity to see wildlife up close and personal. And that's one of the ways that National Wildlife Federation has been working on efforts to bring back the monarch as well as other common backyard species through our Garden for Wildlife program, helping people understand that by providing some very basic elements, food, water, cover, places for wildlife to raise young, and practicing sustainable gardening, that you can have a backyard, front yard, balcony garden that welcomes birds, butterflies, other wildlife, really with doing a few basic things.
So, Jen, if you would just quickly tell us about the mayor's program for monarchs.
Sure. So as we've been talking with folks about the importance of the monarch butterfly and its significant challenges with the population decline, we've been searching for ways to engage everyone across the country in the effort to bring back the monarch. And one of those is called the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So we've been talking with mayors across the country about ways that they could issue proclamations, engage their departments of parks and recreation, schools, and communities to focus on the importance of pollinator habitat. So maybe rather than mowing lawn areas throughout parks or along right-of-ways, that those could become pollinator gardens, working with schools to raise and release monarch butterflies by planting native milkweed or having native milkweed in the classroom. So there's a host of things that mayors can do and communities can do to improve habitat for monarch butterflies.
And I will hasten to say that it's August and the fall is a good time to plant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now is time to start thinking about next year. And native plants like milkweed and some of the other flowering plants that we had talked about, like Joe Pye weed or goldenrod, are perennials. They come back year after year.
Right.
So fall is a good time to get them started. So you'll be ready for the spring when we'll be starting to see monarchs come through again.
Well, Jen, it's been a pleasure having you today. And I have to say that if the wind is blowing a certain way, we're going to get monarchs on Tillman Island here in Talbot County. If the wind is blowing another way when they're going south to Mexico, if the wind is blowing another way, they might land over in Anne Arundel County or in southern Maryland. But wherever it blows, we know that they need the milkweed going down the Chesapeake.
Absolutely. And folks here can have a big difference in the future of the monarch butterfly.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you.